When you stop contacting a man, you're not just giving him space, you're turning his whole world upside down. Let me tell you something that nobody wants to admit about what really happens when you go quiet on a guy. Everyone thinks when you stop reaching out to a man, he just feels relieved. Like he got what he wanted. Like now he's free and happy about it. But here's the real deal. When you actually stop contacting a man who is getting your attention, 4 specific things start happening in his head that he never saw coming. These things happen whether he likes it or not, and they totally change how he thinks about you, about himself, and about what was going on between you two. Here's what people get wrong. You've been told that when you stop contacting a man, he celebrates. That he wanted space anyway, that guys love it when women back off. You've heard that going quiet is just playing games, that he'll see through it and lose interest, that if a man really liked you, your silence wouldn't matter because he'd just reach out himself. But all of that misses what's actually going on in his head when the attention he was getting suddenly disappears. When you stop contacting a man, when you're not the one showing interest anymore, when you're not giving him what he got used to, his mind doesn't throw a party. His whole way of thinking starts falling apart in ways he doesn't get and definitely didn't expect. This isn't about games or tricks. This is about what happens in a guy's head when someone who made him feel good suddenly stops doing that. How his brain reacts when a woman who was giving him attention stops. And how everything inside him gets shaken up when he realizes he's not getting something he didn't even know he needed. When you stop contacting a man, his whole view of himself starts getting questioned. And all that questioning creates thoughts and feelings that are totally different from what happens when you're still giving him attention. The problem is everyone treats silence like it's simple. You stop texting and either he'll chase you or he won't. But real silence, the kind that actually messes with a guy's head, works way deeper than that. When you become the person who stopped giving him attention, when you're not making him feel wanted anymore, when you're not there boosting his ego, his whole mental world changes. And that change creates stuff that normal dating advice never talks about. So stick with me here. Don't click away, because what you're about to hear will totally change how you understand what your silence actually does to a man and what's really going on in his head when you're not there anymore. You'll find out why guys who seemed fine suddenly aren't, why you not being around creates problems he didn't see coming, and exactly what's happening in his mind when he realizes the attention he was getting is gone. Let's get into it. Before we talk about the 4 specific things that happened to him, you need to get how a guy's brain deals with losing attention he got comfortable with. This isn't complicated. This is just how people work. When you stop contacting a man, when you stop being the one who reaches out, his brain has to deal with some real changes. The good feelings he was getting from your attention aren't coming anymore. His stress goes up because something he could count on suddenly became unpredictable. And his brain starts working like crazy, trying to figure out what changed and why. These things don't just sit there. They change how a man feels all day long. How sure of himself he feels changes. His mood changes. How he sees himself gets shaky. And here's the important part. Most guys have no clue this is happening. Men aren't taught to notice their feelings or pay attention to how they feel inside. They're taught to just push through stuff, stay tough, not think about emotions too much. So when you stop contacting a man, when that good feeling he was getting from you disappears, most guys don't get right away why they suddenly feel it. They just know something's different, and it bugs them way more than they thought it would. When you stop contacting a man, his whole focus gets rearranged around you not being there anymore. Think about how feeling good about yourself normally works. We get those good feelings from different things during the day, doing well at work, friends laughing at what we say, people paying attention to us, small wins that make us feel okay. But when someone who is making you feel good suddenly stops, that leaves a hole, and your brain doesn't just forget about that hole. It notices it all the time. He's at work and he realizes you haven't texted. He's hanging with friends and he notices his phone hasn't shown your name. He's going through his day and part of his brain keeps noticing that the good feeling he was getting from you isn't there. This isn't him choosing to think about it. It's his brain automatically noticing that something that made him feel good is gone. But here's where guys get tricky. Men are taught that needing a woman to make you feel good means you're weak. There's huge pressure on guys to not need anyone, to not care too much, to be fine on their own. So when a man notices that you being quiet is affecting him, when he realizes he actually misses the attention you were giving, it creates this fig H in his head. Part of him feels the loss and wants that attention back. Another part tells him he's being pathetic for caring, that he should be fine without you, that needing your attention makes him less of a man. This fight makes everything worse because now he's not just dealing with missing your attention, he's also beating himself up for missing it. There's also how guys deal with losing control. When you stop contacting a man, he loses control over how things go between you. Before, when you were reaching out, he was in charge. He decided when to answer, how much to talk, whether to give you attention back. But when you stop, that control flips. Now you're deciding everything. You're the one choosing not to talk. And guys hate losing control, especially with dating. His brain starts going crazy trying to figure out how to get that control back, what he should do, whether he should reach out, what it means that you stopped. Another thing is the ego hit. When someone stops giving you attention, your ego takes it personal. It's not just she's busy or she's doing her own thing. Deep down, his ego starts asking harder questions. Why did she stop? Am I not good enough? Did she find someone better? Was I just not worth her time? These questions attack his view of being wanted, being valuable, being someone women like. And for guys whose whole value often feels tied to women wanting them, this ego hit goes really deep. There's also the comparing he starts doing. When your attention stops, he starts measuring himself against other guys way more. If you're on social media and he sees you liking other guys' stuff or talking to other people, his brain immediately goes to, she replaced me, that guy's better than me, I wasn't good enough. Even if you're not doing anything with anyone else, his mind makes up these comparisons because you not paying attention makes him feel less valuable, and feeling less valuable makes him wonder who's more valuable than him. And finally, there's how getting used to something creates attachment. Even if he wasn't the one chasing, even if you were the one reaching out, he still got used to having you around in his head. Your messages were part of his day. Your attention was something he counted on. And people get attached to things they get regularly, even if they're not making it happen themselves. So when you stop, his brain doesn't just move on easy. It lost something it got used to having, and that loss creates a reaction he didn't expect. The first thing that happens to him is this: his ego freaks out. And suddenly he needs to prove to himself that women still want him. This is one of the biggest signs of what happens in a guy's head when you stop contacting him. When you pull back your attention, when you stop being the one who reaches out, his ego doesn't just accept it and move on. His ego starts panicking. And that panic creates this mental spiral where he suddenly needs proof that he's still someone women want. Here's why this happens. Men build a lot of how they see themselves around being wanted by women. It's not something they talk about, but it's deep in how guys think. When a woman is giving a man attention, reaching out to him, showing she's interested, his ego takes that as proof that he's someone women want. It's like points in his head. This woman wants me, so I'm doing fine. I'm valuable. I'm someone women go after. But when you stop contacting him, when that attention goes away, his ego loses that proof. And losing proof that women want him triggers a crisis inside. This ego freakout shows up in specific ways in his head. He starts replaying your last conversations, looking for what he did wrong, not because he necessarily wants you back, but because he needs to understand why he dropped in value. His mind asks stuff like, what did I do? When did she stop liking me? What made her stop seeing me as worth her time? These aren't real questions looking for real answers. They're ego questions, trying to protect how he sees himself. The ego crisis also makes him start comparing himself to how he used to be. He thinks about times when women were chasing him, when he was getting attention, when he felt more wanted. And comparing where he is now, you stopped reaching out to those past times makes him feel like he's getting worse, like he's losing his appeal, like he's not as good as he used to be. This comparing creates worry that sits in his head all day, making him feel less sure of himself in general, not just about you. Another part of this is how guys get addicted to validation without knowing it. When you were contacting him regularly, his ego was getting fed. Every message from you was a small hit of, I'm wanted, women like me, I'm doing okay. His ego got hooked on those hits. So when you stop, it's not just that the validation is gone. It's that his ego is going through withdrawal. It wants that validation back. It needs proof that he's still someone women want. And it starts doing mental gymnastics to get that proof. This is why his mind often goes to other women, not necessarily because he wants them more than you, but because his ego needs new sources of validation to replace what you were giving. He starts noticing other women more, thinking about texting exes, thinking about getting on dating apps, not because he's genuinely interested, but because his ego is desperate. His mind is trying to fill the hole you left by finding proof he's still wanted somewhere else. The ego crisis also makes him obsessed with what you're doing. His mind keeps going back to you because you're the source of why he lost validation. He wonders if you're talking to other guys, if you found someone else, if you're happier without him. Not because he cares about you specifically, but because his ego needs to know why it lost value in your eyes. And not knowing makes the crisis worse because his mind fills in the blanks with worst case stuff that makes him feel even less wanted. What makes this really telling is how it affects everything else in his life. When a guy's ego goes into crisis, it shows up everywhere. He gets more sensitive to rejection at work. He gets more defensive with friends. He looks for validation in other relationships more obviously. The ego hit from you stopping contact spreads through his whole life because his basic sense of being wanted got shaken. Another way this shows up is in how he talks to himself. Before you stopped contacting him, his internal voice about himself was probably fine. But after you stop, that voice gets mean. Of course she stopped. You're not that interesting. You're losing it. Women don't chase you anymore because you're not worth chasing. This negative self-talk isn't based on anything real. It's his ego trying to make sense of why it lost validation, and the easiest answer is that he's the problem. The ego crisis also makes him test whether women still want him in weird ways. He posts more on social media to see who pays attention. He reaches out to old friends to see who responds. He might even try sneaky ways to get your attention without directly reaching out, like watching your stories or liking old posts. All of this is his ego desperately trying to collect evidence that he's still wanted, still good enough, still someone women go after. What's big about all of this is that ego crisis in guys is fragile. Men are taught to never admit their ego is hurt, to never show they need validation, to never let on that a woman not being interested affected them. So all of this happens silently in his head. He won't tell anyone he's spiraling. He won't admit your silence hurt his ego, but it's there running in the background of everything he does, creating worry and need for proof that he hasn't lost his value. The second thing that happens is this. His brain starts making up stories about why you stopped, and every story is about what's wrong with him. When you stop contacting a man, his mind doesn't just think, oh, she's busy or she's doing her own thing. His brain goes into story making, and the stories it makes aren't fair or based on facts. They're almost always about him not being good enough, about him failing, and about why he wasn't enough. Here's why this happens. People's brains hate not knowing why something happened. When something changes and we don't know the reason, our minds automatically start making up explanations. It's how we're wired. But in dating, this goes crazy. When you stop contacting him and he doesn't know why, his brain needs an answer. And because guys are taught to blame themselves when things with women don't work out, his mind makes up stories where he's the problem. This story making shows up in specific patterns in his head. His first story is usually, I wasn't interesting enough. He replays your conversations looking for times when you seemed bored, when he said something stupid, when he wasn't funny or fun to talk to. He builds this whole story where you stopped contacting him because talking to him got boring, because he couldn't keep your interest, because he's just not that interesting. His second story is usually, I'm not good looking enough. Even if looks were never a problem, his mind goes there. He starts thinking, maybe you realized you could do better. Maybe you saw someone who looked better than him. Maybe how he looks just wasn't what you wanted. This story attacks how he feels about his appearance and makes him more self-conscious about how he looks in general. His third story often goes to, I was too interested, or I wasn't interested enough. His brain can't decide which one, so it bounces between both. Maybe he scared you off by being too available, too quick to respond, too into you, or maybe he played it too cool and you thought he didn't care. His mind makes both stories at the same time, which makes him feel like no matter what he did, it was wrong. The story making also goes to comparing himself to other guys. His mind makes up stories about you meeting someone better, someone funnier, more successful, better looking, more exciting. In these stories, he's not just not good enough. He's not good enough compared to some perfect guy he made up who's everything he's not. These comparison stories destroy his confidence because they make him feel fundamentally less than. Another story his brain builds is about timing. She was never really that into me. She was just bored. I was just something to do until something better came along. This story makes him feel used, temporary, not special. It makes your attention on seem like it was never real, which means he was fooling himself the whole time. This story creates both hurt and embarrassment because it says he read everything wrong. What makes these stories really damaging is that he believes them. Not because there's proof, but because his brain needs an answer, and these are the answers it gives. Once his mind picks a story, it looks for evidence to back it up. He remembers that one time you didn't laugh at his joke. That becomes proof he's not funny. He remembers that one time you took a while to respond. That becomes proof you were losing interest even back then. His brain cherry picks memories to prove whatever story it made up. The story making also affects how he acts in future situations. If his mind decided you stopped because he wasn't interesting enough, he goes into new situations worried he's boring. If his mind decided he came on too strong, he pulls back with new people, even when pulling back doesn't make sense. These stories become beliefs about himself that change how he acts going forward, even though they were never based on truth. Another part is how these stories create shame. Men are ashamed to admit they're hurt by a woman not being interested. So these stories stay in his head, eating at him, and he can't talk to anyone about them. He walks around carrying stories about not being good enough that nobody knows about, and keeping them secret makes them feel more true because they never get challenged. The stories also make him scared to reach out. Even if part of him wants to contact you, his mind tells him, don't, she stopped for a reason, you'll just prove whatever's wrong with you. So the stories his brain made up to explain your silence become the reason he stays silent too, which creates even more distance and more story making about what that distance means. What's big about all of this is that making up these stories shows deep insecurity. Confident guys might wonder why you stopped, but they don't spiral into stories about everything wrong with them. When you see a guy making up stories about what's wrong with him just because you stopped reaching out, it shows his sense of value was never that solid to start with. Your silence just exposed what was already there. The third thing that happens is this. His whole sense of control in his life gets messed up, and suddenly he feels powerless in ways that go beyond just you. When you stop contacting a man, something big shifts in how he feels about being in charge of his own life. His feeling of being in control gets broken. This is huge because guys build their whole identity around being in control, having power, making things happen. But when you stop reaching out, that sense of control gets damaged in ways that affect everything. Here's why this happens. Before you stopped contacting him, even if he wasn't the one reaching out first, he still had control in how things went. He controlled how much he talked. He controlled when he answered. He controlled how interested he acted. That control made him feel stable, like he was making choices. But when you stop, all that control disappears. Now you're the one making the choices. You're deciding not to talk. You're controlling whether there's contact or not. And that flip from him having control to you having control creates a crisis in his sense of power. This control loss shows up in specific ways in his mind. He feels helpless, which is a feeling guys hate more than almost anything. His brain keeps going back to the situation with you, trying to figure out what he can do, how he can fix it, how he can get control back. But the answer is nothing. He can't make you contact him. He can't force your attention. He can't control whether you're interested. And realizing he's powerless in this situation creates anxiety that sits in his chest all day. The control loss also makes him question other stuff in his life. If he can't even control whether a woman stays interested, what else can't he control? His mind starts doubting how good he is at work, how good he is with friends, whether he can make things happen in general. The specific loss of control with you becomes a general feeling of being powerless that spreads into everything. He starts feeling less confident in meetings, less sure of himself with people, less certain he can handle problems. Another part of this is how losing control triggers shame for guys. Men are raised with the message that real men control situations. That power and control define being a man. So when a man loses control to a woman, when you're the one with power because you decided to stop talking, it doesn't just feel bad. It feels like he failed at being a man. His mind tells him he messed up as a guy because he couldn't keep your interest, couldn't control how things went, couldn't make things go the way he wanted. This control loss also creates obsessive thinking. When you can't control something, your brain tries to control it mentally by thinking about it constantly. He can't control whether you reach out, but his mind can replay every conversation, analyze every detail, plan what he'd say if you did contact him. This mental trying to control becomes compulsive because his brain is trying to satisfy the need for control, even though real control isn't possible. The feeling of being powerless also makes him more controlling in other relationships. When someone feels out of control in one area, they often try to grab control in other areas to make up for it. He might get more controlling with friends, making all the plans, insisting on his way. He might get more bossy at work, being more aggressive in decisions, needing to be right. This isn't about those relationships. It's about him trying to feel powerful again after feeling powerless with you. Another way this shows up is with his phone. He checks it constantly, not because he thinks your message, but because checking feels like doing something. His brain creates this fake idea that by checking his phone, he's somehow involved in whether you contact him, like he has some control over it. But he doesn't. And every time he checks and there's nothing, it just reminds him he's powerless. The control loss also affects his decision-making. When someone feels powerless, they often get frozen about decisions. He can't decide if he should reach out or not. He can't decide if he should move on or wait. He can't decide what the situation even means. This freezing happens because his normal sense of being in charge is broken, and without feeling in control, making decisions feels impossible. What makes this really significant is that control loss in guys shows vulnerability they can't handle. Men are taught to never be vulnerable, never admit being powerless, never show that someone else has power over them. So when you stop contacting him and he feels this loss of control, it exposes vulnerability he doesn't have tools to deal with. And that exposure makes everything feel worse because he can't even admit what's happening. The fourth thing that happens is this. His mind starts making you way more valuable than you actually were when you were around, and suddenly you become more important than you ever were before. When you stop contacting a man, something shifts in how he sees you. You go from being someone he was casually talking to someone his brain decides was actually really important. This is one of the clearest signs of what silence does to a guy's mind, because it shows that your value to him goes up the moment you're not available. Here's why this happens. People's brains value things more when they can't have them. It's automatic. When you were contacting him regularly, your attention was available. His brain saw you as easy to get and didn't see you as particularly rare or valuable. But when you stop, when your attention becomes unavailable, his brain reclassifies you. Suddenly you're rare. And being rare makes his mind decide you're way more valuable than you actually are. This value increase shows up in how he thinks about you now compared to before. When you were reaching out, he probably took your messages for granted. He answered when he felt like it. He didn't think about you that much. You were just someone on his phone. But now that you've stopped, his mind starts remembering you differently. He remembers your conversations as more meaningful than they were. He remembers your connection as deeper than it actually was. He remembers you as more special than he thought you were before. His brain is rewriting history to match the high value it's now putting on you. The value increase also makes him start seeing you as perfect. He forgets the things about you that weren't great. He stops remembering the conversations that were boring or the times you annoyed him. His mind only focuses on the good parts, the fun times, the things he liked. This happens because his brain wants to justify why losing you matters. If you were just average, losing your attention wouldn't be a big deal. But if you were special, amazing, different from everyone else, then losing you is a real loss worth feeling bad about. Another part of this is how the value increase creates wanting. Before you stopped, he didn't necessarily want you that much. He was fine with how things were, maybe even didn't care. But now that you're gone, his brain suddenly wants you, not because anything about you changed, but because you became unavailable. And people's brains are wired to want what they can't have more than what they can have. You not being around created desire that you being around never did. This value increase also makes him compare every other woman to you now. And in these comparisons, you win every time. Other women seem less interesting because his mind has made your value super high. Other conversations seem more boring because he's remembering your conversations as better than they were. Other connections seem weaker because he's decided what you two had was stronger than it actually was. This comparison trap makes it hard for him to get interested in anyone new because his brain has made you the standard nobody can meet. The value increase also creates regret. His mind starts telling him he messed up, he didn't appreciate you enough, he should have been more interested when he had the chance. This regret isn't based on reality. You're the same person you were before, but his brain needs to make sense of why you not being around bothers him. So it creates this story where he had something valuable and lost it because of what he did. Another way this shows up is in fantasy creation. Now that you're not around, his mind starts imagining what could have been. He creates scenarios of how good things could have been if he'd done it differently. He imagines a relationship that never existed and probably never would have existed. But these fantasies feel real to him because his brain is desperate to make sense of why someone who's not available matters so much. The value increase also makes him and to prove himself to you. Even though you're not in contact, his mind is now worried about what you think of him. He wants you to see he's doing well. He's wanted by other women. He's someone you made a mistake by not staying interested in. This need for your approval becomes stronger than it ever was when you were actually around, which shows how backwards his brain's value system has become. What's big about all of this is that value increase only happens when someone's attention stops. If you had kept contacting him, his brain would have kept seeing you as available and normal. But by stopping, you triggered a response in his psychology that made you more important in his mind than you ever were in reality. And that shows his interest in you isn't about you. It's about scarcity, not being available, and his brain's automatic response to losing something it got comfortable having. Understanding these 4 patterns gives you real clarity about what's happening when you stop contacting a man. You're not just creating space. You're triggering his ego, freaking out, him making up stories about what's wrong with him, loss of control that shakes his whole sense of power, and value increase that makes you matter more than you did before. These aren't signs of love or real connection. These are signs of how a guy's brain reacts when something that made him feel good disappears and control gets taken away. This understanding also helps you see the difference between real interest and just a reaction. A guy who's genuinely interested doesn't fall apart when you pull back. He notices, he might reach out, but his ego doesn't collapse. He doesn't make up disaster stories. He doesn't lose his sense of control, and he doesn't suddenly decide you're perfect. When you see these 4 patterns after you stop contacting someone, you're seeing someone whose interest wasn't based on real connection. It was based on having control and getting validation. The best thing you can do is pay attention to how a guy responds when you actually stop reaching out. Does he handle it with stability, or does his whole internal world seem to fall apart? Does he reach out in a normal way, or do you sense panic and need underneath? Does he respect your space, or does his behavior show he's spiraling? The answers to these questions tell you whether you're dealing with someone who can handle a real relationship or someone whose interest was only about what you were doing for his ego. When you stop contacting a man, you get to see who he really is. Not the version he shows when he's comfortable and in control, but the version that appears when he loses control and his ego gets challenged. That version tells you everything you need to know about whether this is someone worth your energy. And remember, guys who are actually solid don't collapse when you stop reaching out. They notice, they respect it, and they